What's up, hobby friends? In this video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. When I built my Ironclad for the Junkforce, I did document the process through Instagram, but it was all just stills and text, and it didn't feel like you were following me along on a journey, just in terms of the medium being limited to low resolution photos and not actually uploading anything to my YouTube channel to document the process. It felt kind of stiff, and I wanted to do something a little different this time in building the Mecha-Gargant for my Junkforce. So basically what I'm going to be doing for this video series, it's not so much a how-to, although along the way I will be sharing with you some tips and tricks and sort of showing you how I build the thing. Very much like the Ironclad, but because it's going to be in video form, I'll be able to show you perhaps a certain way of the way I approach things or what I'm doing and how it'll turn out. But it's also going to be sort of following along on the journey in sort of a vlog form. So throughout the process of however long this actual model takes me, periodically I'll basically record, not daily, but my journey through building the thing, and we'll be able to take it from concept through to printing the underlying structure and then actually detailing with plastic card to create armor. We're sculpting stuff on top of it, we're detailing it, and then painting it. So hopefully front to back, I'll be able to record the entire process and just take you along the journey, sort of a vlog slash how-to of the process. So this first video is more just talking about why a Mecha-Gargant, why I am tackling this project in this way, and sort of the vision that I have for what I'm doing. And then at least this first week was a lot about developing the concept, doing some mock proof of concepts with a 3D printer, and then figuring out the plan of attack for the next week. So something I've been wanting to do for quite a bit is actually create an army of giants. Now, Games Workshop created the Sons of Behemat battle tome, and I think conceptually the army is very, very cool, and the models themselves are brilliant. At least in terms of the Mecha-Gargant, I really like the way it looks, but unfortunately, no matter what detailing you put on top of it, there's really only one pose to that model. And then the smaller giants, the Gargants themselves, are old models. They're over a decade old, and those also only have one pose. I built those Gargants before, tried to convert them. There's a lot of work involved, and I imagine the Mecha-Gargant is the same way. And so in tackling the army, or at least part of it, building one as a mercenary I can take for my other armies, I want to do something a little different anyways, something that could, in line with my Necrons and now my current Junkforce, be completely unique to myself, and that isn't very easily replicated at all. So then to the new edition of Age of Sigmar dropping, and essentially you're almost incentivized to have a monster or a hero that can be a monster, or something like a Gotrek to deal with other armies, other monsters, other Gotreks. And Junkforce took a huge hit because they don't have innate monsters in their book, and without wizards they can't turn heroes into monsters. So really, you're more inclined to take a model like Gotrek, which I currently have in my army, or if you want to play more for the objective points and try and play around sort of the bonus points that you can get for completing battle tactics and grand strategies for having monsters, allying in a mercenary like a Mecha-Gargant. And my ideal list for my Junkforce will have a Mecha-Gargant or Mecha-Gargant in the end, but rather than use the stock Games Workshop kit and then convert it to be Junkforce, I figured I already have all these mechanical ships and objects and robots. Why not build a giant robot to be a Mecha-Gargant? And so that's pretty much how I'm approaching it, how I'm going to at least build one. And then depending on how it turns out, how much work is involved, and how inspired I'm feeling, I may continue building more, expand my Halfling Wastelander narrative, and then maybe at some point I'll have a full Sons of Behemat army. So this project began like every major project does for me, and that's in finding some inspiration and starting to build a reference and style library. This is a habit I've picked up over many years throughout my career, actually starting all the way through college, and something I would do for every project, both as a way of finding that inspiration, but also as a means of building a library to finally reference from in the final project. I always turn to Pinterest and to the internet and to find either a color palette or an idea that helps to inspire and drive the vision or the direction of the project. And working on doing this Mecha-Gargant is no different. As you can see, I already have a fairly sizable Pinterest board for current and past projects, and I certainly have one for my caravan. I have an idea for my display board. This is for the giants, the robots in the army, the ships, and then these are the halflings. Pretty much, I've been building this reference board since the Sons of Behemat book came out, and this would have been right around the time that I was beginning to develop my Junkforce idea as well. And I think I knew very early in that I wanted to do this sort of Mecha-Gargant. I just wasn't quite sure how to do it. Before I got my 3D printer, I was sort of limited to hand sculpting, hand cutting with the Plasticard, and then using the cry cut. And I knew that even just doing a one-off would be a lot of work and not something I could easily reproduce if I were to do an army of them. But having picked up the 3D printer and having gotten quite a few prints under my belt to the point where I'm now comfortable in creating a variety of pieces and supporting them properly and great or small, even getting all those fiddly details, I'm much more comfortable in tackling this project now, especially with the amount of STLs that are out there, both free and paid for. I had initially gone to Thingiverse to look for robots or mechs, particularly anything that can be articulated and posed. My initial plan or thought was to basically get some sort of skeleton or structure that I could scale and print to my purposes, very much like a master or perfect grade Gundam that has a skeleton underneath that you then layer the armor plates on top of. So my initial find was actually this construction bot on Thingiverse. It's designed to be a toy, and it has this articulate skeleton underneath where you can basically build the parts, you can pose it, and you can repose it with armor plates on top that you can take off and on. I'll show you the actual print and talk through the issues I had with it in a later part of this video. You can use the timestamp in the description below. But suffice to say, this wasn't what I was looking for, although there were some pieces of it that I really did like. The hand in particular is something that I'm going to be using in my final design. I like the way it articulates. It's chunky but simple enough, and I can print that as a separate piece and scale it down for my purposes. When I was browsing my Pinterest and on Google, an image came up of a World of Mechs or Universe of Mechs Kickstarter. And essentially this guy a couple of years ago had created this line of 1/35 scale toys, these mechs that could be posed, articulated, and played with. The Kickstarter failed, but I think he did pursue a different way to get this product out there, and instead he's now selling these 1/87 scale STLs that you can buy, download, and print. I immediately jumped on this as a possible solution, and I printed up a 1-to-1 scale mock-up just to really get a sense of and feel for how it would print out, how it would articulate, and if I could actually use it as the basis for my design. So this is the construction bot printed. The actual STL file is quite large. I had to scale this down to about 35% to get it to fit entirely on the Saturn build plate. So it's a quite bit smaller than the actual original model, but I think the issues that I'm going to have with this kit are going to be present regardless of the size of it. So immediately when I first started building the actual robot itself, I was immediately struck by how Gundam-esque the limbs actually are, and I don't think it really translates in the photos, especially when you see it's a lot simpler without the armor plates, and it could form a pretty decent base to work off of, but unfortunately, and even without the plates, the foot itself has a lot of those cues from the Gundam design. I'm not a huge fan of the cockpit. I was always going to replace that. And then the crotches, it sticks out a bit, and if you don't use the plates it comes with, it feels a little awkward in sizing. But really one of the biggest issues I had was with the fit of everything. So this figure is supposed to be articulated. You're supposed to be able to reposition it and pose it. But the tolerances for all the different joints and pieces that help to actually articulate the figure, they're so tight that I ended up either cracking some of the joint pieces or just snapping pieces off entirely, trying to get them to fit onto the figure. Now, of course, this is caveated by saying the articulation is really more just for being able to pose the figure and to be able to have it doing what I want it to do. Obviously, I can just glue it all afterwards, and the articulation itself doesn't matter. But then there's also the matter of how it's articulating, and you have these massive, very blocky pieces that they feel very much toy-like, and not so much as an integrated mech. And I don't think there's any amount of covering up I can do that can make it feel not like I just took a toy 3D printed or not and then just built on top of it. That was one of the issues I was having. The biggest issue is that I think no matter what I do with this, it still ends up feeling very much like a toy, especially in the legs, which is where I want to be using this piece, legs and the arms. The hand sort of has that issue, but I do use similar jointing for my smaller robots, and I think that'll be a nice design cue to carry forward. So when I was building it, I figured the hand would be a nice thing to actually maintain and keep for a bit for future use. Then I found this heavy mech from Teco Toys, and I'm in love with this thing. It's a really brilliant design. I think the torso's a little bit too big relative to the limbs, the legs in particular. The arms feel okay, but I feel like the legs could be 30 to 40% larger and taller, and it would still feel rather proportional. The articulation feels nice because unlike the construction robot that uses round holes and pegs to articulate, you need one articulation point for a bend and then another up top for a twist, which I've broken because another issue around with this one, it did misprint. Also why I don't have the right arm built. I had to salvage some parts to complete the other limbs, but so you can see that it's not a ball and socket joint. It's all of these are single points of articulation, and so it's very limited in its range of movement, and I had to be very, very careful not to force anything or else it would snap or break, or in this case it was glued on and I because of the misprint, it's broke. With the Teco toys, because they use ball and socket for all the major points, so the shoulders and the hips as well as the foot, you end up with, even though it's fewer pieces, a wider range of motion and smoother articulation. I'm not a huge fan of the hands, and so when I scale it up, I'm going to end up chopping off the hands and swapping it with this. This will be scaled down a little further, and then this will be scaled up to double the size. So when I was sizing into the box, it matches up pretty well. What's neat about this one too is that it does have a cockpit that opens up with a large hatch to access both seats, or a small hatch for the, I'm assuming, the navigator in the back to take a look, survey, maybe he's the commander, I don't know. So having printed the proof of concept one-to-one of the heavy mech figure, I spent a day or two sort of just playing around with it, reposing it, trying to feel how the silhouette would look on a larger scale, especially if I'm going to start layering armor plates on top of it, if I'm going to start hacking it apart or adding antenna, stowage, etc. Just seeing if it fits the aesthetic of what I'm going for with my Junkforce, and whether it's something that I'm happy with in terms of aligning with my vision of what I think a Junkforce mech would look like. I actually really love the design of this thing. The original artist did a really, really great job of designing it. It's got this nice weighted cockpit that gives the entire thing a very substantial feel. But then the lankiness, the thinness of the limbs, the arms and the legs, it makes it I don't want to say fragile, but it feels like it could really move. It can take a hit, but it can definitely move quickly, almost like it's a scout walker, which I think really fits into the vision I have of the way my halflings approach their vehicles. And it's not of having to wage war, but it's more they've taken odds and ends, scraps and bits to build functional vehicles that they use to traverse the wastelands and essentially scavenge for parts. And it's only when they've more recently encountered hostile forces that they've now had to convert these vehicles into machines of war. And so I think with a bit of work, with a bit of detail in this thing is really, really good. My only issue, of course, is the height and how to make the walker feel or stand a little taller without changing the overall silhouette, without making it too lanky, and without making the cockpit too big. So I did a bit of math, and if you scale the entire thing up 200%, it's the perfect size in terms of the cockpit. I think the halflings will fit in the seats very, very well. But the only issue is that the figure only stands about 3 inches tall, so 6 inches if you scale it up. It's not quite the just shy of 7 inches that a Mecha-Gargant is. And I almost want the legs to also have a bit of a heavier proportion to them. One of the original concept art that I had found that really inspired or drove sort of this vision of this Mecha-Gargant was this piece of art right here. And you can see that it's got a large torso, really tiny arms, with these massive chunky legs and thighs. And I sort of wanted to have that silhouette in at least this first Mecha-Gargant I'm building. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be reproducing it for an entire army, but I think one for now, and then we'll go from there and we'll see how it turns out. So using my trusty Photoshop skills and just quickly cutting and pasting something, I come up with this. I scaled the legs an additional 30% on top of what it originally is. And then I also added in the construction mech's hands, scaled down to 30%. Not only does it make the robot feel just a little chunkier, a little heavier, but the articulate hands gives me some options in terms of posability. So using this as a basis, I could then go into Chitubox, take the STL files, and now begin to size, support, and then set up my print files to actually send to the Saturn to print. So here you can see I have set up all of the parts to print in Chitubox. So all I did was I took the original STL files of the model and I scaled them up to 200%. In the case of the legs, I took that 200%, copied them so that in Chitubox it resets that value, that new 200% value to be 100, and then scaled it again to 30% to give me that increased size for the legs. I've also printed an extra set of the hands just in case some of the fingers misprint, or when I cut them or sand them, maybe some of the edges may get damaged. That was an issue I was again finding with the construction bot that I printed. It always helps us to have backups just because it does take a couple hours to print, and when I start to build it, I don't want to run into issues where if something breaks, I don't have a backup. You'll also see here that I have the legs at the basic 200% size, and this is just in case I'm not happy with the 30%. I don't think so, but ultimately this only cost me maybe an extra like $1 or $1.50 to print. So having it as a backup, not a big deal. And then if I end up printing another robot, hey, I have parts for it. All the parts, the angles are pretty much angled in a way to minimize the print lines. I do have anti-aliasing on at maximum, and then just auto boxing or auto supporting in Chitubox. Now I would normally print these parts hollow at 2mm for terrain and stuff like that, stuff I've been doing in the past. But because I want this to be a sturdier piece, I want to be able to cut and drill into it for modifications and parts. I found in past prints that if I drill into or cut, not only is the inside not cure and it could have some liquid resin in there, the air can sometimes force curing inside that can then crack it afterwards, even though the walls are thicker, and it wouldn't crack if I hadn't drilled it. So just to reduce on issues with damaging the parts down the road, when I do print these, they are going to be solid, although whoever modeled them did model them hollow with drain holes, and you can see the crotch right here. There's a drain hole on the bottom of each of these tubes, and similarly on, I guess, the back up of the torso, it has a drain hole for resin. So I guess whoever set up the files did a really, really good job, and all you really have to do is load them in and print them. So I have this torso bit right now printing, and it's going to take about 15 hours. And then I've got to fire off this file as well, and I'm expecting this one to take probably about 12 or 13 as well. As of recording, this is a Wednesday, so I think this file will be done in the afternoon on Thursday, and then this one will probably be done and ready for me to clean Friday evening. So by the time of this video being released on YouTube, I won't have any of these built and ready to assemble, but that'll be a thing I can record for next week's video. And then pretty much in terms of next steps, for next week, once I've got the parts printed out, cleaned, shouldn't take more than a day. So by the weekend, I'll be able to put it all together, spend a few days working on the pose and how I want to base them all, just in terms of the setting, what I want the robot to be doing, whether he's going to be standing or dynamic. And then I can start spending the next week or two, or maybe even 3 weeks, just sort of detailing the robot out, modifying, adding plates, and just bringing it more in line with the scrappy aesthetic of my current army. One of the challenges as well is what I'm going to be doing for the Wasteland pilots. So a lot of the original sketches I had gathered for the halflings, inspired by Ian McHugh's artwork, are these really cool jumpsuit looking guys, the baggy pants. They remind me a lot of like the cosmonaut suits. I know it's not 100% like that, but stuff that you would see back then from like the 1960s and 70s space race. And while I couldn't execute this for my original army when I first built it, having spent a lot more time now with sculpting, with doing these little bits and conversions, I think I'm ready to try and convert a halfling with something of this outfit. And because the cockpit of this heavy mech does open up, both as a large cockpit to reveal both seats, and then there's a tiny hatch on top where the back pilot can stand up and survey. One of the ideas I'm having is sculpting 2 halflings to go along with the robot. So they're either going to be in the cockpit, or maybe one's coming up the top and then one's exploring on the ground. Don't quite know yet. That'll probably be coming in the posing phase, but I definitely want to tackle this for the way I want the halflings to be sculpted in the outfit that they're wearing. So that's pretty much it for this video. More just a teaser, nothing really super involved in terms of modeling. Much of this week was spent 3D printing the proof of concept figures, and then I'm currently 3D printing the actual full-size parts for the heavy mech. So I hope you enjoyed this insight, and I hope you enjoy this video format. I really hope in the weeks to come, as I continue to produce videos for this video series, that you'll continue to follow along on the journey. As always, if you want to share your thoughts, comments, suggestions, you can drop a comment below and I'll try to respond to all of them. If you want to check out my other social media platforms, I'll make sure to drop links in the video description below. Until next time, as always, happy hobbying.